In the dark recesses of the American prison system, where shadows cloak the walls and silence reigns supreme, dwell men whose very names once sent shivers down the spines of communities. These aren't mere inmates. They are the architects of terror, the chieftains of some of the most fearsome gangs to ever roam the streets of America. Imagine a world where power isn't diminished by concrete and steel, where influence extends beyond the bars and control is maintained with an iron fist. These men have carved their legacies in blood and violence, their reputations cemented by deeds that have left scars on the collective memory of society. Today, we delve into the lives of these notorious gang leaders and dangerous members. From behind bars, they continue to exert their formidable power, their stories a witness to their relentless pursuit of dominance. Stay tuned as we journey into the heart of darkness, revealing the untold stories of America's most dangerous gang leaders and members currently incarcerated in U.S. prisons. Number 10. Raymond Shrimp Boy, Chow of the Chi Kung Tong Gang. And while in the multicultural streets of San Francisco's Chinatown, where tradition and modernity intertwined, a man known as Raymond Shrimp Boy Chow rose to notorious prominence. His story is woven with ambition, betrayal, and a relentless quest for power, marking him as one of the most dangerous figures in the city's underworld. Raymond Chow, nicknamed Shrimp Boy due to his small stature, was born in Hong Kong in 1959. By the time he was a teenager, he had already immersed himself in the world of street gangs. His early involvement in criminal activities set the stage for his eventual rise to power within one of the most infamous Chinese-American criminal organizations, the Chi Kung Tong. Chi Kung Tong, also known as the Chinese Freemasons, had deep roots in San Francisco's Chinatown, dating back to the 1800s. Originally established as a fraternal organization to support Chinese immigrants, over time, parts of the organization became entwined with illegal activities, including narcotic trafficking, extortion, and money laundering. It was within this shadowy landscape that Shrimp Boy would make his mark. Shrimp Boy's ascent within the Chi Kung Tong was characterized by a ruthless determination to climb the ranks. After serving several stints in prison for various crimes, including armed robbery and substance trafficking, he re-emerged in the early 2000s as a reformed community leader. This facade of reformation allowed him to gain significant influence and eventually take control of the Chi Kung Tong in 2006, following the murder of his predecessor, Alan Leung. Under Shrimp Boy's leadership, the Chi Kung Tong expanded its criminal enterprises. He orchestrated complex drug trafficking operations and extortion rackets while maintaining an image of respectability within the community. This duality made him both a revered and feared figure. One chilling example of Shrimp Boy's dangerous leadership style occurred in 2011. During a clandestine meeting in a Chinatown tea house, Shrimp Boy ordered the execution of a rival gang member who had dared to encroach on his territory. The assassination was carried out with precision, sending a clear message to anyone who might challenge his authority. Despite his efforts to present himself as a legitimate community leader, law enforcement agencies were closing in on Shrimp Boy. In 2012, an undercover FBI operation began to unravel the intricate web of criminal activities under his command. The investigation, which lasted several years, involved wiretaps, surveillance, and the use of informants, meticulously documenting his illegal operations. The turning point came on March 26, 2014, when federal agents arrested Shrimp Boy in a dramatic raid that also implicated numerous associates and even State Senator Leland Yee. The charges against him were extensive, including racketeering, massacre for hire, money laundering, and narcotics trafficking. The indictment laid bare the extent of his criminal empire and his role as its mastermind. Shrimp Boy's trial was a sensational affair, capturing media attention with its revelations of corruption and organized crime. Despite his claims of innocence and attempts to paint himself as a community reformer, the evidence against him was overwhelming. On January 8, 2016, he was found guilty on all charges. The following August, he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Today, Raymond Shrimp Boy Chow is presently serving his sentence at the United States Penitentiary, Florence AdMax in Colorado, a facility designed to house the most dangerous inmates in the federal system. Number 9. Jeff Fort of the Black P. Stones, El-Rukayn Gang. In Chicago during the 1960s, a charismatic young man named Jeff Fort rose to prominence. Fort would eventually become the leader of one of the most notorious gangs in American history, the Black P. Stones, which later evolved into El-Rukayn. The Black P. Stones gang was originally formed in the late 1950s in the Woodlawn neighborhood on the south side of Chicago. Initially, it was a coalition of several smaller gangs that united to protect their community from other rival gangs. The group quickly grew in power and influence, and by the early 1960s, it had become a dominant force in Chicago's gang landscape. Under Fort's leadership, the gang underwent significant changes, both in structure and ideology. Jeff Fort himself was born on February 20th, 1947, in Aberdeen, Mississippi, moved to Chicago as a child. By his early teens, he was already deeply involved in gang activities. Fort's charisma and leadership skills quickly set him apart, and he rose through the ranks of the Black P. Stones. By the mid-1960s, he had become one of the gang's most influential leaders. He restructured the organization, transforming it into a more centralized and disciplined entity, which eventually adopted the name El-Rukayn, meaning the cornerstone in Arabic. Fort, by then a converted Muslim and leader of El-Rukayn, sought to expand the gang's influence beyond the streets. He allegedly attempted to align with Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi, proposing to commit assassin acts in the United States in exchange for financial support. This plot was part of Fort's grander vision to transform El-Rukayn from a street gang into a paramilitary organization with global influence. The FBI intercepted communications and recorded conversations that outlined this chilling conspiracy, demonstrating Fort's willingness to engage in international sabotage to further his gang's ambitions. Fort's leadership was marked by ruthless enforcement of discipline within the gang and brutal retaliation against rivals. In one notable instance in the late 1970s, a dissident faction within the Black P. Stones challenged Fort's authority. He responded by ordering the execution of the faction's leaders, solidifying his control and sending a clear message that dissent would not be tolerated. However, Fort's reign was not to last. His activities had drawn significant attention from law enforcement. In 1983, he was arrested on narcotics trafficking charges. During the investigation, authorities uncovered the extent of El-Rukayn's criminal enterprises, including substance distribution, extortion, and violence. Fort was convicted and sentenced to 13 years in prison. This first major legal blow did not, however, completely sever his influence over the gang, as he continued to lead El-Rukayn from behind bars. Fort's most significant downfall came in the mid-1980s, when the FBI and federal prosecutors launched an intensive investigation into El-Rukayn's operations. The gang's involvement in the plot with Libya was a key focus. In 1987, Fort was indicted on charges of conspiracy to commit acts of extremism, along with narcotics trafficking and racketeering. The trial revealed the depths of Fort's ambitions and his willingness to employ violence and terror to achieve his goals. In 1987, Jeff Fort was convicted of these charges and sentenced to 80 years in prison. The severity of the sentence reflected the gravity of his crimes and his role as a leader who had transformed a street gang into a sophisticated criminal enterprise with aspirations of extremism. Fort was initially incarcerated at the United States Penitentiary in Marion, Illinois, one of the most secure facilities in the federal system. But today, Jeff has been moved to ADX Florence in Colorado, where he remains imprisoned, serving his sentence in the nation's most secure federal prison. Fort's life behind bars is a stark contrast to the power and influence he once wielded on the streets of Chicago. Number 8. Pedro Magu Gutierrez of the United Blood Nation, UBN, gang. Pedro Magu Gutierrez was a high-ranking member of the United Blood Nation, UBN, a notorious gang that has long been a scourge in the urban streets of America. His journey through the gang's hierarchy is marked by violent episodes, strategic criminal maneuvers, and an ultimate reckoning with the law. The United Blood Nation, or UBN, originated in Rikers Island, New York City, in 1993. The gang was founded by Omar Porti, also known as OG Mac, and Leonard McKenzie, known as Deadeye. The duo created UBN as an East Coast branch of the Bloods, which had its roots in Los Angeles. UBN quickly grew in numbers and influence, spreading its reach beyond prison walls and into various urban communities. The gang engaged in narcotic trafficking, robbery, homicide, and other forms of organized crime, gaining a fearsome reputation. Pedro Gutierrez, known on the streets as Magu, was not just a member but a leader within UBN. Rising through the ranks due to his cunning, ruthlessness, and unwavering loyalty to the gang's code, Magu earned his place among the gang's elite. He became a key figure in orchestrating UBN's criminal activities, both inside and outside of prison. Gutierrez is considered the godfather of the UBN gang and has served as the chairman of the council that governs the UBN since 2003. And one of the events that solidified Magu's status as a dangerous leader occurred in the early 2000s. During a turf war with a rival gang, Magu orchestrated a series of violent retaliations. In one particularly brutal instance, he ordered the execution of a rival gang member who had encroached on UBN territory. The hit was carried out in broad daylight, sending a clear and chilling message to anyone who dared challenge the United Blood Nation. Magu's ability to command such lethal operations without hesitation made him both feared and respected within the gang and its enemies. Magu's criminal career was marked by his involvement in large-scale drug trafficking. In 2007, he played a pivotal role in a major substance distribution network that spanned multiple states. Under his leadership, UBN managed to control significant portions of the substance markets in various urban centers, amassing vast profits and further entrenching their power. Magu's strategic acumen in expanding the gang's substance operations showcased his dangerous capabilities as a leader. However, the law eventually caught up with Pedro Magu Gutierrez. In 2012, after years of surveillance, undercover operations, and gathering evidence, federal authorities arrested him. He was indicted on multiple charges, including racketeering, conspiracy to commit homicide, and narcotic trafficking. The indictment laid bare the extensive criminal enterprise that Magu had helped build and sustain. The trial that followed revealed the depth of his involvement in violent crimes and narcotics distribution. In 2013, Magu was convicted on all counts. His sentencing was a significant blow to the United Blood Nation, as it removed one of their top leaders from the streets. The court handed down a life sentence without the possibility of parole, underscoring the severity of his crimes and the threat he posed to society. Magu was sent to the United States Penitentiary Administrative Maximum Facility, ADX, in Florence, Colorado, the most secure federal prison in the country, often referred to as the Alcatraz of the Rockies. This facility is designed to house the most dangerous criminals and gang leaders, ensuring they remain isolated from the outside world and unable to continue their criminal enterprises. Number 7. Omar Porte, OG Mac, of the United Blood Nation gangs. Omar Porte, known in gang circles as OG Mac, carved out a notorious reputation within the United Blood Nation, UBN, a prominent and often feared gang operating primarily on the East Coast of the United States. His story is one of ascent, influence, and eventual downfall, highlighting the complexities of gang culture and the consequences of a life mired in violence and crime. The United Blood Nation, commonly referred to as UBN or simply Bloods, emerged in the mid-1990s as a coalition of African-American street gangs. The gang was founded on principles of unity, loyalty, and resistance against rival groups, particularly the Crips. Operating under a strict hierarchical structure, the UBN quickly gained a reputation for its organized criminal activities, including narcotics trafficking, extortion, and acts of violence. Omar Porti, aka OG Mac, played a pivotal role in the early growth and organization of the United Blood Nation. His leadership style was characterized by charisma, strategic thinking, and a willingness to enforce discipline through intimidation and force. Rising through the ranks, Porte became a respected figure within the UBN, commanding loyalty and obedience from his followers. One defining event that showcased OG Mac's influence and ruthless demeanor occurred in the late 1990s. Facing internal challenges to his authority, Porte orchestrated a series of retaliatory attacks against rival gang members who had dared to challenge his leadership. These orchestrated acts of violence not only solidified his control over the UBN, but also sent a chilling message to those who would defy him, cementing his reputation as a dangerous and uncompromising leader. However, Porte's reign of power would eventually come to an end. Law enforcement agencies, increasingly focused on combating gang-related crime, intensified their efforts to dismantle the UBN's operations. In 2002, Omar Porte was arrested and indicted on federal racketeering charges, marking a significant blow to the leadership of the United Blood Nation. During his trial, evidence presented by prosecutors painted a vivid picture of Porte's involvement in numerous criminal activities, including conspiracies and extortion. On June 18, 2004, Omar OG Mac Porte was convicted on multiple counts and sentenced to life in federal prison without the possibility of parole. The severity of the sentence reflected the gravity of his crimes and his role in perpetuating violence and criminality within the UBN. Presently, Omar Porte serves his sentence at ADX Florence in Fremont County, Colorado. And due to the nature of his crimes and his continued influence within the gang, he is housed in a facility designed to manage and contain inmates with a history of violent offenses and leadership roles in organized crime. Number 6. Jose Chucky Martinez of the MS-13 gang. Jose Martinez, known as Chucky in the streets, carved his name into the chilling legend of MS-13. This notorious gang, with origins rooted in El Salvador, found fertile ground in the gang-ridden neighborhoods of LA, where poverty and desperation often birthed alliances born of survival and solidarity. It was in the early 2000s when Chucky Martinez first emerged as a force within MS-13. Born into a life overshadowed by violence and instability, he found solace and purpose within the gang's ranks. MS-13, short for Mara Salvatrucha, was more than a gang. It was a family bound by blood and loyalty, with origins tracing back to Civil War-torn El Salvador. Chucky quickly rose through the ranks, fueled by a ruthless determination and a penchant for violence that set him apart even among hardened gang members. His reputation as a dangerous leader was cemented in countless tales whispered in fear across street corners and alleyways. One such story recounts an incident in 2005 when a rival gang attempted to encroach on MS-13 territory. Chucky orchestrated a calculated ambush that left a trail of bodies and sent a clear message. MS-13's grip on their turf was ironclad. But with power comes scrutiny, and Chucky Martinez soon found himself in the crosshairs of law enforcement. Years of surveillance and intelligence gathering culminated in a coordinated effort to dismantle MS-13's operations in Los Angeles. In September 2010, a multi-agency task force executed a series of raids targeting high-ranking MS-13 figures, including Chucky Martinez. The indictment that followed painted a grim portrait of Martinez's leadership within MS-13. He faced charges ranging from racketeering to conspiracy to commit slaughter, each accusation bolstered by meticulous evidence linking him to a string of violent crimes. The justice system moved with methodical precision, ensuring no stone was left unturned in their pursuit of justice. In a courtroom drama that mirrored the intensity of the streets he once ruled, Chucky Martinez stood defiant, yet resigned, as the judge delivered his sentence. In December 2013, after a lengthy trial that showcased the brutal realities of gang warfare and the devastating impact on communities, Jose Martinez was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. The sentence, a solemn declaration of accountability for his actions, marked the end of an era for MS-13 in Los Angeles. Today, Chucky Martinez resides in a federal penitentiary, Administrative Maximum Facility, ADX, in Florence, Colorado. Number 5. Demetrius, Big Meech, Flannery of the Black Mafia family, BMF, gang. Big Meech's story is not just one of power and wealth, but also of ambition, loyalty, and the inevitable clash with the forces of law and order. The Black Mafia family, BMF, rose from humble beginnings in the early 1990s, born from the vision and ambition of Big Meech and his younger brother, Terry T. Flannery. The brothers sought to establish a dominant force in the drug trade, not just in their hometown of Detroit, but across the entire United States. BMF quickly earned a reputation for its sophisticated operations and extravagant lifestyle, which drew in celebrities, athletes, and those hungry for a taste of the high life. Big Meech's position within the BMF was central. As the charismatic face of the organization, he wielded influence with a mix of street smarts and business acumen. His ability to navigate the complexities of the drug trade and build strategic alliances propelled BMF to unprecedented heights of power and profitability. Under his leadership, BMF expanded its operations to Atlanta, Miami, and beyond, establishing a sprawling network that seemed unstoppable. But alongside the lavish parties and flashy cars lurked a darker side. Big Meech's reputation as a dangerous leader was cemented through acts of intimidation and violence aimed at rivals and those who dared to challenge BMF's dominance. One notorious incident that exemplified Big Meech's iron-fisted personality occurred in 2003. A rival gang attempted to muscle in on BMF's territory in Atlanta, sparking a brutal turf war. Big Meech orchestrated a retaliatory strike that left a trail of bodies and sent shockwaves through the criminal underworld. It was a stark reminder that crossing BMF meant facing deadly consequences. However, the law was closing in. In 2005, federal authorities launched a sweeping investigation into BMF's substance trafficking activities. Dubbed Operation Motor City Mafia, the investigation uncovered the extensive reach of BMF's operations and its multi-million-dollar empire built on coca distribution and money laundering. On October 27, 2005, the hammer fell. Big Meech, alongside his brother Terry T. and other key members of BMF, was arrested in a series of coordinated raids across several states. The charges were severe: conspiracy to distribute cocaine, money laundering, and firearms offenses. The indictment painted a picture of a vast criminal enterprise that had operated with impunity for years, flaunting its wealth and influence. Facing the weight of the evidence against him, Big Meech opted for a plea deal. In 2008, he pleaded guilty to conspiracy to launder money and conspiracy to possess with intent to distribute white powder. His guilty plea was a strategic move to mitigate his sentence, but the consequences were nonetheless significant. In 2009, Big Meech was sentenced to 30 years in federal prison, a hefty punishment reflecting the scale of BMF's criminal activities and his leadership role within the organization. But a twist that came to his favor now makes Demetrius Big Meech Flannery counts down the days until his highly anticipated release from prison in 2025. As this news has since created a buzz in the streets of Detroit, with anticipation from his son and his fans. The co-founder of the notorious Black Mafia family, BMF, was initially sentenced to 30 years behind bars in 2008 for his role in large-scale white powder trafficking and money laundering. However, thanks to the tireless efforts of his attorney, Brittany K. Barnett, Flannery's sentence was reduced by 32 months, evidence to his commitment to rehabilitation and re-entry into society. Today, Big Meech is incarcerated at the United States Penitentiary Lewisburg, located in central Pennsylvania. It's a far cry from the glamorous lifestyle he once enjoyed, surrounded by luxury and the trappings of success. Number 4. Kenneth Supreme McGriff of the Supreme Team Gang. In South Jamaica, Queens during the late 1970s and early 1980s, the name Kenneth Supreme McGriff became synonymous with power, fear, and the intoxicating lure of the substance trade. As the leader of the Supreme Team, McGriff's story is a riveting saga of rise, fall, and the relentless pursuit of dominance within the underworld. The Supreme Team was founded in the early 1980s by Kenneth McGriff and his nephew, Gerald Prince Miller. What began as a small operation quickly blossomed into one of the most notorious and influential narcotic trafficking organizations in New York City. The Supreme Team built their empire on the distribution of white powder, capitalizing on the burgeoning coca epidemic that swept through the city. Their operations were centered in the Baisley Park houses, where they controlled the narcotics trade with an iron fist. Kenneth McGriff, known as Supreme, was the undisputed leader of the Supreme Team. His reputation for strategic brilliance and ruthless enforcement made him both feared and revered. He was not just a kingpin, he was a master manipulator who knew how to wield power and influence. Supreme was a figure who commanded respect and loyalty, but also instilled terror in those who dared to cross him. One particularly chilling example of McGriff's lethal leadership personality occurred in 1987. A rival coca dealer named Ricky Tata Givens was encroaching on Supreme Team's territory. Supreme ordered his assassination to eliminate the threat and send a clear message to others. Givens was brutally gunned down, and his execution exemplified the lengths to which McGriff would go to maintain his dominion over the white powder trade in Queens. Despite his efforts to cover his tracks, the law eventually caught up with McGriff. In 1985, McGriff was arrested for narcotics trafficking and was sentenced to 12 years in prison. This first major blow to his empire saw him incarcerated at the United States Penitentiary in Lewisburg, Pennsylvania. However, Supreme's influence did not wane entirely during his incarceration. He continued to exert control over the Supreme Team through loyal lieutenants and a well-established network. Released on parole in 1994, McGriff attempted to transition into the entertainment industry. He founded the film production company, Picture Perfect, and sought legitimacy through the production of the film Crime Partners, based on a Donald Goines novel. However, old habits die hard, and McGriff's return to the streets saw him entangled once again in the violent world of narcotics trafficking. The turning point for McGriff came with his second arrest in 2003. This time, the charges were even more severe. McGriff was indicted for orchestrating the homicide of Eric E. Moneybags Smith and Big Nose Troy Singleton in 2001, as well as for coca trafficking and racketeering. The case against him was bolstered by testimonies from former associates who had turned informants, painting a vivid picture of McGriff's criminal activities. On February 2, 2007, Kenneth Supreme McGriff was convicted of homicide, racketeering, and narcotic trafficking. The court handed down a life sentence without the possibility of parole to him, effectively ending McGriff's reign over the Supreme Team. He was sent to the United States Penitentiary, Lee, in Virginia, where he remains to this day. Number 3. Luis Felipe, King Blood, of the Latin Kings gangs. In the vibrant neighborhoods of Chicago and New York City, a notorious gang known as the Latin Kings carved out a fearsome reputation. Among their ranks, one name stood out: Luis Felipe, also known as King Blood. His story is one of ambition, power and a relentless pursuit of control, culminating in a dramatic downfall that landed him in one of the most secure prisons in the United States. The Latin Kings were founded in the 1940s in Chicago, initially as a self-defense group for Puerto Rican immigrants facing racial discrimination and violence. Over the decades, the group evolved into one of the largest and most organized Hispanic street gangs in the country, with a structured hierarchy and a strict code of conduct. The Latin Kings' influence spread across many states, with significant presences in Chicago and New York. Luis Felipe, born in Havana, Cuba, in 1962, moved to the United States and found himself immersed in the gang culture of the Bronx, New York. By the mid-1980s, Felipe had risen through the ranks of the Latin Kings, becoming a revered and feared leader. He established the New York chapter of the Latin Kings and took on the moniker King Blood. His leadership was marked by a mix of charisma, ruthlessness, and strategic acumen. One story that highlights Felipe's dangerous leadership occurred in the late 1980s. Felipe, from his prison cell, orchestrated a series of violent attacks against rivals and dissidents within the gang. Using coded letters and messages, he maintained control over the Latin Kings and ordered the punishment of those who disobeyed his commands. One notorious incident involved the brutal murder of William "Lil Man" Cartagena, a member who had fallen out of favor. Felipe's orders from behind bars demonstrated his ability to instill fear and enforce loyalty, even when physically separated from his followers. Felipe's reign as a gang leader was marked by numerous violent acts and criminal enterprises, including narcotics trafficking, extortion, and slaughter. His leadership extended beyond the prison walls, illustrating the far-reaching influence he held over the Latin Kings. However, this extensive criminal network also attracted the attention of law enforcement. In 1991, Luis Felipe was arrested on charges related to his gang activities. The investigation revealed a vast criminal operation that Felipe controlled from prison. He was convicted of multiple charges: conspiracy to commit homicide and racketeering. On December 16, 1995, Felipe was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The court proceedings highlighted his role as the mastermind behind the violent and criminal activities of the Latin Kings. Today, Luis Felipe is serving his sentence at ADX Florence in Colorado. ADX Florence houses some of the most dangerous criminals in the federal system, and Felipe's incarceration there reflects the severity of his crimes and the threat he posed to society. Number 2. Larry Hoover of the Gangster Disciples Gang. In the streets of Chicago in the 1960s, a young man named Larry Hoover emerged as a figure of both fear and fascination. Born on November 30, 1950, in Jackson, Mississippi, Larry was uprooted at a young age and planted in the tough, unforgiving soil of Chicago's West Side. It was there, amidst the chaos and clamor of a city grappling with crime and poverty, that Larry Hoover would carve out a notorious legacy. Larry Hoover was more than just a street kid. He was a strategist, a visionary, albeit one with a dark vision. By the tender age of 13, Hoover had joined a gang called the Supreme Gangsters. He was quick to rise through the ranks, demonstrating a keen mind for organization and a ruthless streak that earned him respect and fear in equal measure. The 1960s and 1970s were a period of significant gang activity in Chicago. Hoover, always the thinker, saw the potential in unifying the fragmented gang landscape. In 1969, he orchestrated a merger between his gang, the Supreme Gangsters, and another local gang, the Black Disciples. The result was a powerful new entity, the Gangster Disciples. Hoover positioned himself at the helm, a king in a kingdom of chaos. Larry Hoover's leadership style was a blend of charisma and cruelty. He demanded loyalty and obedience, and he was willing to enforce his rules through violence. One story that exemplifies his dangerous leadership and personality occurred in 1973. A 19-year-old named William Pookie Young was suspected of stealing money and narcotics from the gang. Hoover ordered Young's abduction. Young was brutally beaten and then shot to death. His body was dumped in an alley, a grim message to anyone who might consider crossing the gangster disciples. This homicide was not just a punishment, but a demonstration of Hoover's iron grip on his organization. However, Hoover's reign was not to last unchecked. The law was closing in on him, and his time was running out. On March 16, 1973, Hoover's criminal empire began to crumble when he was arrested for ordering the execution of William Young. The evidence was damning, and the trial swift. Hoover was convicted of slaughter and sentenced to 150 to 200 years in prison. But even behind bars, Hoover's influence did not wane. He continued to run the gangster disciples from his cell, orchestrating substance trafficking, extortion, and other criminal enterprises with a cold efficiency that belied his incarceration. His cell became the nerve center of a sprawling network that stretched far beyond the prison walls. The 1990s brought another twist in Hoover's saga. The federal government, determined to dismantle his empire, launched an extensive investigation. Using undercover agents, wiretaps, and informants, they built a case that Hoover was still actively managing the gang's activities. This operation, known as Operation Headache, culminated in a major indictment. In 1995, Larry Hoover was charged with continuing to engage in a criminal enterprise while in prison. The trial was a high-profile affair, with the government presenting overwhelming evidence of his ongoing criminal activities. On August 22, 1997, Hoover was convicted of substance conspiracy, extortion, and continuing to engage in a criminal enterprise. This conviction added a life sentence to his already lengthy prison term. Hoover was transferred to the United States Penitentiary Administrative Maximum Facility in Florence, Colorado, known as ADX Florence, often dubbed the Alcatraz of the Rockies. It is a place designed to contain the most dangerous and high-profile criminals, a fortress of concrete and steel where even the slightest movement is monitored. Today, Larry Hoover remains in ADX Florence, his influence largely diminished but not forgotten. Number 1. Tyler the Hulk Bingham, Aryan Brotherhood Gangs. Tyler Bingham, known ominously as the Hulk, forged his legacy within the ruthless hierarchy of the Aryan Brotherhood. This infamous prison gang, born from the crucible of America's penitentiary system, held sway over the hearts and minds of those incarcerated within its iron grip. Tyler Bingham's journey into the Aryan Brotherhood began in the late 1980s, a turbulent era within the penal system where racial tensions simmered and alliances were forged in blood. Born into a world where survival meant finding protection among one's own, Bingham quickly aligned himself with the Brotherhood. Founded on principles of white supremacy and unwavering loyalty, the gang operated with a military-like precision that commanded fear and respect. Bingham's rise through the ranks was marked by a brutal determination and a reputation for violence that set him apart even among his peers. His leadership style was commanding yet calculated, earning him the nickname the Hulk for his imposing presence and ferocious temper. One chilling example of his authority came in 1995, when a rival gang member attempted to challenge the Brotherhood's dominance within a maximum security facility. Bingham orchestrated a swift and savage retaliation that left the dissenting inmate hospitalized and served as a stark warning to others who dared defy the Brotherhood's authority. However, power within the prison walls often carries a heavy price. In June 2007, after years of surveillance and investigation, federal authorities moved decisively to dismantle the Aryan Brotherhood's operations across multiple states. Tyler Bingham, by then a high-ranking figure within the gang, was among those targeted in a series of coordinated raids. The indictment that followed detailed a litany of charges against Bingham, ranging from racketeering to conspiracy to commit homicide. The evidence against him was damning, citing his direct involvement in orchestrating acts of violence both inside and outside prison walls. In a trial that captivated the nation for its insights into the inner workings of prison gangs, Bingham stood defiant yet resigned as the judge delivered his sentence. In January 2010, Tyler "the Hulk" Bingham was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. The sentence, a stark reflection of the havoc he wreaked and the lives he shattered, marked the end of an era for the Aryan Brotherhood's grip on fear and violence. Today, Tyler Bingham resides in the Supermax Federal Prison, ADX Florence, known as the Alcatraz of the Rockies. Surrounded by impenetrable walls and monitored with meticulous scrutiny, he exists in a world where time stretches endlessly, and the echoes of his past reverberate in the quiet moments of isolation.